This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not provided as financial, legal, or any other advice. The information is not investment advice or an offer to buy or sell any securities or make any investment. The views expressed by guest speakers are their own, and any reference to third-party products, services, or information does not constitute an endorsement thereof by SNN or its affiliates. SNN expressly disclaims all liability for any individual's use of the information presented in this podcast. My guest on the show today is Rene Goehrum, President, CEO, and Chairman of BioSyent, a publicly traded company. The symbol is RX on the TSX Venture. BioSyent is a specialty pharmaceutical company focused on commercializing products that the company says provides a distinguishable benefit to patients and their healthcare providers, and, according to their website, is known for their ability to effectively and efficiently introduce new products to the Canadian market. BioSyent is, as the company states on their website, actively sought out as the Canadian market provider of choice by brand innovators with niche or specialty products looking for a trusted partner. The first time we interviewed Rene was back in June 2013. At the beginning of June 2013, the stock was trading around $1.30 Canadian, and as of recording this introduction in the morning of September 15, 2023, the stock opened at around $7.85 Canadian. Furthermore, as of Q2 2023, the company has reported 52 consecutive profitable quarters, again, according to their Q2 2023 results presentation. Many of you listening know the BioSyent story well. And yet, despite the company's performance during Rene's tenure, I think some of you would agree that BioSyent is the most well-known, unknown company. I thought it was time for folks that didn't know the company's history and where they're going to invite Rene on to talk about all of that, plus their capital allocation, discipline, and approach, criteria for in-licensing new products, and Rene's promised land, his long-term vision for BioSyent. With that, please enjoy my conversation with Rene Goehrum, President, CEO, and Chairman of BioSyent. Rene, thank you for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Great to be with you today, Bobby.
It's great to be with you too. This was, doing an interview with you for this series is definitely you're one of my white whales because, whenever I think of BioSyent, especially in our MicroCap circles, within all the folks that we know in our space, I always think whenever I think of BioSyent, it's like the most well-known unknown company ever, if you know what I mean. It's just so, I say all that because, as we do on the show, the first question I always ask everybody on here is, Rene, can you start us off with that one line that best describes BioSyent?
Sure. We're a Canada-based specialty pharmaceutical company primarily focused on commercializing innovative, unique, and differentiated pharmaceutical assets in the Canadian market. That's our business.
Very good. All right, so let's take a look back at the BioSyent history. Can you give us a little background on when the company was founded, what the original thesis was, and then we'll start there, and then we'll catch ourselves up here.
Sure. BioSyent's history is interesting. We started on the older junior exchanges that were more focused on mining. I think that's when the corporate entity was created. So it goes back decades. See, that's not necessarily the length of my involvement in the company. At some point in time, about a little over 25 years ago, it was revived as an R&D shop for agricultural technology opportunities, and so that was how the company itself was founded. So if you kind of look back at corporate records, you'll see that it goes back many decades. I'd say the more recent history then of BioSyent goes back around 25 years. We were commercializing those ag tech assets. I got involved in the business around that time and saw more opportunity in human health than in crop health or in maintaining value in harvested crops. So we had observed some success stories in the Canadian marketplace with essentially an in-licensing strategy. So we are not a developer of pharmaceutical products. We look for assets that are proven and effective, that have been commercialized or approved in other jurisdictions, and we in-licensed those assets for the Canadian market and then commercialized them. So we're not a virtual shop. We actually have boots on the ground, people in the street meeting with customers every day. And so the thesis was that there were these products that could address an unmet medical need that were not available in Canada. And often those products would be too small for existing Canadian pharmaceutical companies, typically the subs of multinationals. That, big pharma is obviously present here. And then there was a cohort of R&D companies that were taking technology, often is developed in universities and in university settings, that spun out of those universities, and a lot of kind of R&D, the typical what you think of as a biotech investment. So our role and our thesis is in between that. We don't develop the drug, but we don't also spend a lot in further development and evolution of those assets. We look for products that are essentially not big enough to be of interest to big pharma, but that will address an unmet need and fulfill a need that either a doc or a healthcare professional has with their patients, or with the patients themselves or consumers. Some of our products are quasi-consumer healthcare.
Absolutely. And for those who are watching the video version of this, Rene's background has literally the names of all their different products that they have within the BioSyent company. So, Rene, going to your background with the company and coming into all this, we were literally just talking about this before we pressed record, about how you've been at the company now for about 26 years. And I think you were brought in to do something completely different. So, I mean, when you kind of took the helm and you steered the ship to say, okay, this is our new direction, what gave you the confidence, and what kind of experience did you have to say, okay, yeah, I might have been brought in to do this, but now we're going to go here and do it like this?
Actually, it's interesting, Bobby. We've ended up at a place where I'm much better suited than I was to my first introduction to the company. So I had a background in consumer products marketing, and I had been with Procter & Gamble earlier in my career, and so I had a lot of experience in consumer products and distributing products through retail channels. And I had done some work after that experience in providing marketing and sales services, agency type work for larger pharmaceutical companies. So that was my kind of entree to pharma, combined with fast moving consumer goods, brand building experience. I sold that business and had already been an investor in what is now BioSyent. I'd been an investor in the company. I provided some assistance to them, some advice on an informal basis. I was asked to join the board, which I did when I was still running my other business. And then I sold that other business. And then I was asked to get more involved in what is now BioSyent. So I invested in the company at that time. I helped them raise some money, and then eventually the board asked me to take responsibility to lead the business. And at that time, I pivoted out of ag tech, where it wasn't really about whether I was suited or not. It was really about the assets that we had, the pathway to commercialization and opportunities for financing such a business. And I just did not see how that was going to work for the shareholders of the company. And I made the recommendation that we pivot to human health. And so that's what we did. We actually rebranded the company. And we've spent now the last 15 years or so building that business in the pharmaceutical industry.
Absolutely. So let's talk about, because correct me if I'm wrong, of all the products, the breakthrough one that kind of put BioSyent on the map and was kind of that initial revenue driver, help grow revenues and really grow the awareness of the company, was FeraMAX, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about, that first breakthrough product and what that experience was like?
Sure. We were approached kind of early in our process of establishing a presence as a pharmaceutical business. We were approached with what is the first generation compound that has now become FeraMAX. We took that on. We created the FeraMAX brand, and started the process of brand building. The oral iron supplement market was traditionally a very ignored market. There was not a lot of promotion. Healthcare professionals actually don't get a lot of education in medical school. Docs are, like, it's, we joke it's 45 minutes on a Tuesday morning in the second year of med school. It just does not get a lot of time and attention as it should. Iron health is really an important part of the health of humans, of all of us. And so we engaged with that product, but we literally bootstrapped. I mean, we were when we were an ag tech company, we were teetering on being out of business. We were out of dough. There was nothing there that was financeable, really. I had a large shareholder lend us some money, totally secured against the whatever meager assets were in the business. So we essentially bootstrapped the business. And as we built the FeraMAX brand and started getting some early success with it, we reinvested continually in building resources and building the brand. So that was kind of the start of it. It was a tough sledding at the time because Canada was going through a change in the regulatory environment of how Health Canada, which is the equivalent of the FDA in the US, how they regulated the segment of healthcare products that FeraMAX now falls into. So they were switching that over, and it was a somewhat uneven playing field for a new participant. So it took us a while to get the product approved and then to get traction in the marketplace. And then when we did, then it went. Then it was, at the beginning, it was quite a hockey stick.
For those that aren't aware, because I mean, most folks, that are listening to this probably have some idea of the FDA approval process and all the clinical trials and the time it takes for some of those products to actually become commercially available. Can you juxtapose that process with what it's like to take a product from R&D to commercialization through Health Canada?
Yeah, it's very similar. You've got to demonstrate efficacy, safety, and that you've got a manufacturing process that can allow replication of quality. Essentially, those are the key elements of pharmaceutical products. So, and in Canada, it would not be dramatically different. Now, it's interesting, just because a product is approved in the US doesn't mean it necessarily gets approved in Canada, and vice versa. We have seen instances of that. I would say that are more historical in nature. I would say today, when you have a dossier that has all of the supporting evidence, clinical trial and whatnot, that can demonstrate efficacy, that data will be sufficient for the FDA and for Health Canada. So that part of the process is the same. They are obviously their own organisms and bodies and issues and priorities. And in that regard, I think they're from time to time, my observation is that Health Canada has not resourced themselves adequately across all of the spectrum of products that they regulate. And so that has certainly caused time delays. And when we've had products in front of Health Canada, I think from time to time that's been an issue, and they've acknowledged it, and they're trying to make some changes in terms of the fee structure so that they can take those fees and then adequately resource so that they can evaluate products to see whether they are appropriate for the Canadian market.
For sure. But long story short, it tends to be a lot less of a timeline from R&D to commercialization through Health Canada versus FDA. Just trying to paint the picture for folks that are like, okay, like why focus just on Canada right now versus like trying to,
I see.
What I mean?
The focus on Canada is not so much about regulatory environment. I think it's really about opportunity and knowing knowing the markets that we know that we can succeed in, and that we don't really need to stretch into the US market to drive value for our shareholders in our business. There is a lot of opportunity in the Canadian market. That's obviously not to say never. I'm experienced enough to never say never. At this stage, we think that there's sufficient growth opportunity in terms of unmet medical needs, products that can address those, that give us a long runway of growth in terms of both the existing portfolio of products, which were just recently added to, but also other opportunities for the Canadian market. So we are, obviously, we're not nearly the size of the US pharmaceutical and healthcare market, tiny fraction of it, but it is still a very large market. We're a top 10 pharmaceutical market in the world.
Absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit also here about, and you mentioned some of the criteria that you're looking for when, especially originally when, Faramax was kind of like the flagship at that time. And, I've interviewed a number of, I guess you would describe yourselves as a specialty pharma company. I've since my first interaction with you, I've interviewed a number of them now since. And so, as you've kind of grown and gotten to the place where you're at, do you still have some of that same criteria in the sense that, all right, we'll look at a potential product, maybe a little earlier on in its R&D or later on, or, we'd rather have it approved before we want to engage and maybe bring it under the umbrella? Like what's been your thought process as the company's grown?
Yeah, I'd say, it's evolved. For sure, the criteria that we use today is different than it would have been 15 years ago when, at the outset of our pharmaceutical business. One thing for sure is the size of the opportunities. One of the things that we do, there's a number of things we do to assess opportunities. One of them is to put into focus what we think the size of the opportunity is. So what is the disease state? What are the current therapies that are available in that disease state? Are the current therapies meeting the needs, et cetera, et cetera. So we put dimension there. What would our share of voice be in that market, competitive landscape, and then what do we think about pricing? Will it be a regulated price or a non-regulated price? And so that then all sums up to a peak penetration value in sometime in the future after, well after launching the product. And I'd say, as you could appreciate, we've gone upstream from that, from what was, a product that would have been of interest 10 years ago, 5 years ago, probably is not a product of interest this year. So we've taken our expectation for size of asset, size of opportunity, we've taken that up. And, we will still look at niche products where they fit with an existing call target that we have. So if there's a doctor type that we're already calling on, a specialist, for example, and this new opportunity, a new asset would fit within that call universe, and therefore we can use an existing sales force or sales team, then, our expectation for the size of that opportunity might be a little bit more modest than if we had to go into a new therapeutic class, as an example. I would say we've stuck to our knitting around the economics. Like, it's got to be a win-win deal. Our partners, the people from whom we source those assets, and we've got to come to an arrangement, they'll know what wins for them. But we won't kind of go downscale on our hurdle rates and on the economics. We need to get a certain return on investment. We have got a number of growth prospects in our business, and if we, in-license or engage with products that aren't going to give us a significant return on investment, that's basically sucking oxygen from something else that's going to give us a better return, even though we don't yet know what that is, but we're working on those products in the future.
Yeah.
So we've walked away from low margin, kind of virtually, something that might give you single digit type returns. We have walked away from dozens and dozens of those types of opportunities. So we could be a bigger company. Our top line could be greater, but I'm not sure we'd be more profitable.
That's something that
more valuable. Yeah.
I think that's a quality that is why, BioSyent is definitely and I hope you don't get embarrassed when I say, but it's been kind of a culty name amongst the MicroCap universe. Is you're very strict discipline. You're not just doing deals to do deals, right?
Culty. I need the black hat.
I know we gotta induct you into the Freemasons or something. But yeah, I mean, that's a quality that you just really don't find in a lot of management teams, right? Is like that ability to stay extremely disciplined, especially when you're growing a profitable business. I think you've been, I think on the website, it might have to be updated, but on the tear sheet, it has since Q3 or up until Q3 2022, it was the 49th consecutive profitable quarter. I'm pretty sure that's continued up until
we actually just put out our Q2
right
just yesterday, and it was our 52nd, so 13 consecutive years. We came profitable literally in Q2 of 2010 and have been profitable since then. Yeah.
I think most people want to hear, especially, with being a microcap, being in the industry that you are, with all the opportunities being thrown your way, the ability to stay disciplined. I mean, what do you attribute to this kind of profitability, longevity and stay at the size that you are? Because everybody and their mother would probably assume, like, why didn't Rene just go and raise capital and just like destroy? He's already disciplined, all that stuff. So love to hear more about your thoughts on managing the company in that sense.
Yeah, the short answer, which is it's more glib than fact, is we're Canadian, eh? So I would say it's a number of factors. I think obviously it comes from leadership of the business, kind of a patient. I describe myself as patiently impatient, or impatiently patient, one or the other. And if you're around our office from day to day, week to week, I might be the one or the other, depending on the situation and kind of what we're dealing with at that time. So you've got to have some patience. You've got to think the long game, and it is part of our strategy. And we've put it out there, like, we think long term. Where will our business be in 10 and 15 and 20 years? I know that others do talk that and think that as well. We think it, talk it, and live it. That's just the way we are. And so we've managed to have enough success. I'll tell you that it's been frustratingly slow sometimes. There's no question about it. There have been some periods of time where we are stuck in a range in terms of revenue, and everybody wants the business to grow and thrive and move forward quickly. So it's a little bit of take a long-term approach and make sure that we always imagine, what does it look like in the future when we succeed. And we want to make sure that the view will be worth the climb, because you can be busy doing all kinds of deals and whatnot, but you might not get to where you really want to be. Now, having said that, we've tried some things. Not every decision that a company makes are good decisions. Certainly, on assets, we've made some decisions. We've in-licensed and gone ahead with some products that haven't worked. And that's part of a portfolio management approach as well. So just like you're managing an investment portfolio, we have to manage a portfolio of products. Some are going to be big winners. Some of them are going to do just fine, and some of them are not going to be winners. And you just got to know how to manage that process and how to give enough time and attention through that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, how over the years, like, how have you managed, some of the because I'm sure you've gotten pressure from stakeholders over the years of, like, come, Rene, like,
yeah,
you're conservative. Come on, man. Like, just do it. Let's go. Like, how do you manage? Like, that seems very difficult. I mean, even when you're all aligned and now you're paying a dividend and all this stuff, like, to trying to have the best interests of shareholders in mind, but at the same time, you're having those stakeholders at the same time being like, come on, man, like, just let's go, do this, do that, the other thing. So how do you stay, I guess, calm under pressure? How do you not give in to some of those pressures?
Well, I'd start with, we have to listen, right? So you have to listen, and you have to understand where shareholders are coming from. We get our share of advice from external parties that are maybe potential investors or tire kickers, or they have a perspective and they can tell us how they can run a pharmaceutical business of our size better than we can. That I listen, but I have to discount that advice. But to those people that are shareholders, and we have shareholders with our company that have been with us a long time, like an inordinately long time, and I think we've been blessed by that, right? So they've entrusted us, and we have, they know that how we think and how we approach these things, and we've built some trust with people. How do we deal with that kind of, come on, shake, rattle, and roll, make it go faster? By listening and making sure that we are doing everything that we can to move the business along. And I guess I use this as a way to describe um, not where we were going, but how we were going to get there. I guess I spent more time sharing it in the past than I've had to recently. But we're pretty confident we're going to get somewhere good, and we would just rather take a little bit longer to get there, but to know that we're going to get there, as opposed to the other approach, which is, hey, listen, I'm going to the same place you are, and I'm going to get there 3 times faster. And then you start cutting corners, and you start taking undue risks, and you're not managing the other side of the ledger appropriately. And I'm very focused on observing what's gone on in Canadian spec pharma over the last 15 years or so, and there have been many examples of value destruction um, in the Canadian market. So, and the optics may have looked at maybe that wasn't clearly value destruction, but if you followed the story and the money that went in and what came out when that company finally was bought or sold, I'll call that value destruction. And so that's the thing that, I want to grow the business. I want to make sure it's around in 20 years, and I don't want to destroy what's been built. So it is a delicate balance.
I bet hey, like I know some of the folks that are, long-term investors in BioSyent, and they're no joke, brilliant investors that, really know their stuff. Probably with all due respect, they might even know the business even better than you at this point, it's a good chance. You mentioned now, and I was going to save this question for the end, but you mentioned it a couple times how, it's the slow and steady approach to get us there, that the long-term approach to get us to this, you didn't say promised land, but let's all their promised land, I'm sure, is synonymous in your mind as well. For you, what does that look like? What is the promised land for BioSyent?
Oh boy. Yeah, there isn't really a destination, because I do get asked. I said, okay, what's the long term? What's the exit strategy? Where does this go, and how do you get? And where's that going? So, to me, it looks like one of two things. I openly talk about this internally at our place as well here. Either where BioSyent, we're in business, it's 20 years from now. And we are bigger. We've got more assets across the business. We maybe have done some things about geographic expansion, not just a Canada-based business. Significant revenue, consistent profitability, and the trust of stakeholders all across, both employees and shareholders and vendors, partners and suppliers. Kind of a mentality of being a reliable partner. Or we do all of those things, and at some point in time, somebody comes along and says, we like what you've done, and we're going to offer you some value that your shareholders and you cannot say no to. So it's literally either of those, as opposed to, so how just to differentiate that, as opposed to, listen, if you're a younger tech company, you can do the early stage tech, but I can't take that to market. I just don't have the infrastructure, the distribution capability, potentially the capital to take it to the next level. And so I've got to sell my technology or sell my company if I'm in that situation. That is not the BioSyent model. We are not putting enormous amounts of capital into R&D, risky R&D. We have generally a capital light business model. We engage on assets that are more at the not no risk stage, but at the lower end of the risk continuum. And so it's either the product is going to succeed in the market or do well or do really well. It's not a binary yes or no thing. And so for that reason, we're able to just keep working on that process, and it'll be a fork in the road, and that fork arrives from time to time. We've had interest over the years, and I would say that it's more than just been a couple of times.
Very good. That was more than I expected you to actually answer on that question. I appreciate that. Cool. So, Again, that was supposed to be my last question. So now I feel like I'm going to be taking quite a few steps back to even give more full picture of the business, because, like I said, I've interviewed a number of specialty pharma companies now over the last, 10, 11 years, especially since even you and I first spoke. And so the landscape has definitely broadened. There's now more competition. There's more companies that, whether it's because of BioSyent success or just in general because of the market need, now you're up against other companies now trying to get these same licenses, right? And bring it under to win those contracts. So, what does the competitive landscape look like now? And how are you still staying competitive in order to win some of those, most desired contracts?
Yeah, it's interesting that you could look at it and say, oh, there's more players. I would say there were at various points in time there have been quite a few players. They have come and gone, and so they've come and gone in different ways. There have been spectacular flameouts, and some of them have been kind of merged away into another entity. And so it's always been competitive for us. I don't feel like it's more competitive today. In a way, based on some dynamics in the marketplace, I would say it's certainly not more competitive. It's maybe slightly less competitive than it might have been 2 or 3 years ago. I don't have any hard data to give you there, but I can just say that's perception wise. And depending on the size of asset and the opportunity we're working on, we're not necessarily, competing with all the names that you see when you think of Canadian spec pharma. And our situation is interesting. I mean, we're well capitalized. We have a strong balance sheet. And I think some of the others that you may be thinking of or referring to, you say more competitive, they may be in a situation where they've got to manage things a little bit differently for some period of time while they manage through a higher interest rate environment, as an example. So, we stay active. We do both. We have a fair bit of inbound interest, what I'll call people that are companies that are reaching out to us to assess whether we have an interest in assets that they've got, whether we'd like to take them on for the Canadian market. And then the flip side of that is we have a proactive program where, yes, we go to the industry events where you would expect us to be. Yes, we do that. And in addition to that, we are combing to look for opportunities. But we don't kid ourselves. We know that there's a high likelihood that there'll be others at the other end of the deal that would be looking to essentially compete with us for the deal. We know that. That's part of the, well, geez, why don't you guys go faster? Well, there's some things that we work on, for months, longer than months, that they fall out of bed for whatever reason. Sometimes the partner isn't going to go ahead with it. Sometimes they get clinical trial data that says they're not going to go past, they're not going to get past their phase 3. There have been plenty of those situations. And then sometimes we get pipped at the finish line. And those things happen as well. There are examples I can think of where we got pipped at the finish line and it worked out. I'm not now talking about things from 4 and 5 years ago, that sometimes the best deal you do is the one you don't do.
Yep. I'd love to hear an example for one of as much as you're willing to tell us of, maybe some of the new products, some of the newer licenses that come into the company, what those experiences were like and how you were able to get them over the finish line.
Yeah. We've got a new product. We literally just announced it a couple of weeks ago, Folic. It's for women with polycystic ovary syndrome. And that's an example of one that the partner can really appreciate our focus on women's health. So we have a women's health business, although I don't think of us as a women's health company. We have a women's health business, and we have strong relationships with healthcare professionals, and we understand the channel, and we can create communication and commercialize products successfully in that area. So I think when we're talking to partners for those types of assets, there's a logic. I mean, so, oh yeah, these guys, they know the market, they can do it. What's also interesting is, our product list isn't a mile long. There are other companies that you might think of or consider for the Canadian market that have a pretty long product list, and you might start thinking about how will I know that my product, my asset, when I license it to you, is going to get the time and attention it needs in the marketplace. And so that works in our favor as well. And then sometimes it's just an assessment of where, what's that expression of one man's treasure is another man's what. Sometimes we see treasure where others don't see it, and vice versa. That happens as well.
Yeah, very good. All right. So another question I wanted to ask you has to do with kind of industry tailwinds, headwinds. One headwind in particular, and this also has to do with maybe some of the risks that that might be facing the company. I know down here in the U.S., it's obviously drug pricing. Everyone's very much worried about that. Is that a similar concern that you think about at BioSyent?
Yeah. I mean, there've been several examples of product opportunities where we thought the product made a lot of sense for the Canadian market. The patient was not well served. The doctors weren't well served. But the pricing environment in Canada is such that they've just gone through a process to make modifications, and that through that process, there are limits on what we can charge for a product, and the payer. There's a payer, price and payer, and those are different regulators or different parties, stakeholders. But in the case of price, absolutely, what price could we obtain? We just had to back out of certain situations where we knew that we couldn't obtain a price in the market that would give us a sufficient return on investment over time. So that is certainly an issue. The payer environment, similar. In Canada, the healthcare system has some significant differences than the U.S. One of the significant ones for a business like ours is that the governments are significant payers. So they run typically, not all, but for the most part, run the hospital systems. They mandate budgets to those hospital systems, hospitals, and then the hospitals are tasked with managing budget. So the healthcare delivery is funded by governments. Your GP, your specialist, funded. There's a business relationship between the healthcare professional and government. When it comes to pharmaceuticals, it's the same, but there are certain patient populations, generally based on age, not exclusively, but generally based on age, where if you are 65 plus, you're on basically a government reimbursed drugs, and then private employers pay for the rest. That would be similar to the U.S. system. I think there's a greater portion of government payer where the government is the payer, and they decide what they're going to pay and which drugs they're going to cover and which ones they. So there is a fair bit of complexity there, and we have to take that into account when we're evaluating an asset for the Canadian market.
Absolutely. I mean, it sounds like there were a few that seemed like layups maybe 4 years ago that as a result of some of the new regulation, now it became a little bit more difficult.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's been a few examples of that now in the last, now that the new regulations or guidelines have come into play.
Absolutely. I mean, with the new guidelines and new regulation, has that affected some of the products currently under the BioSyent umbrella? Okay.
No, has not. No.
Got it. So then let's also talk about some of the tailwinds for the industry. I mean, you outline them for me, growing industry. Tell us, like, what are some of the things that will result in some growth for BioSyent? Let's just say organically, and then from an opportunity for more in licensing.
Yeah. I mean, we're the healthcare business. There's a lot of complexity, but let's face it, there's a lot of money spent on healthcare, whether it is by governments or payers, employer benefit plans, individuals. So it's a big market, and I'm not going to say, oh, it's a massive market. How could you miss? But if you contrast that to other markets that ebb and flow, the spend in healthcare is certainly a large market and is continually attracting additional investment. So that is that a tailwind per se? That is a dynamic of the market, which actually makes it attractive. And we talked also earlier about some of the challenges with regulators, FDA, Health Canada. So as much as I will complain or observe about challenges that we're having with the regulator, because it is such a highly regulated business, if you know how to manage through that labyrinth and that process, and you have some momentum in the business, that is an advantage. Like if you and I decided tomorrow we wanted to be an office furniture manufacturer, notwithstanding the fact that I couldn't make anything to save my life, but we could, if we put our minds to it, we could go into the office furniture business next Tuesday.
Sure.
But you can't just say, hey, well, I'd like to distribute pharmaceutical products. Let's get a pitter patter. Let's get out of here. It doesn't. So those barriers are actually a positive. That's not per se a headwind, but it certainly is. It is a positive for the business. The other is the nature. Like we're focused on brands. We're not. Generic products play a role in the marketplace. There's an important role that they play in the marketplace, I suppose. If you're a payer, to appreciate that, we are focused on brands, and by doing so, we think we can create a moat around our brands and our products. And as long as we're providing value, that's a really important part of the equation. But if we're providing value, people do gravitate to brands, or they still do. They're sticky. Not all the business, but brands are sticky in the business, and I think that gives us a headwind where we've got some momentum, and that's a positive. Does that necessarily flow through to giving us additional opportunities for in-licensing? I'd say that last piece with your question, I would say this. I find it quite interesting, the range of innovation that takes place with pharmaceutical and healthcare products. It's very broad. It's constant. And sometimes the innovation is subtle, and sometimes it's, really literally life-changing for people. More of the biotech, new discovery, new chemical entity. But some of that innovation on that continuum can be pretty fundamental. The one thing that it never ceases to amaze me is how there's just been this kind of constant cycle of doing things better with products. Sometimes it's not a new chemical entity. It's not a new compound. It's just a better way to deliver it, or a more convenient delivery mechanism. And so that, I think, I feel for us is a tailwind in terms of opportunities to find new assets to in-license. Like, it's not like when you start with 100 opportunities, and when you get to year 8, there's only 20 left. We've got more in our funnel today than we have ever had.
Got it. That's, I think that's everything that we went through is a great overview and deep, real look at the business as well as the industry itself, or at least I hope so. I'm sure there are folks, I apologize. There's people that are much more even knowledgeable than knowledgeable about BioSyent than even me, so hopefully I did y'all proud, in getting into it. But, now getting into some of these questions that I like to ask everybody on here, the first one being, and this is probably my favorite, when, let's say there's some folks that are new to the BioSyent story, let's just say, or even folks that have been following for a while, and maybe still just don't get it. Right. What would you say are some of the, what do investors still get most confused about, or some of the frequently asked questions that you get regarding BioSyent?
I think the notion that as you're adding products, you've got a base, let's say, a number of people in your business in a functional area, but especially in what I'll call customer facing field sales or or marketing personnel and say, yeah, well, you got all those people, you just add products in there. It's kind of like a manufacturing facility. You've built a facility and you can pump more widgets in. Well, in a business like ours, we have to invest at the front end of the curve to build up those brands that I talked about. So we've got to invest in understanding the market, understanding the therapeutic area. We've got to invest, obviously, in how we're going to position the product. And there's a number of things where we're investing well in advance of revenue, not necessarily product development. People are very familiar. And I don't think my observation is it's well appreciated and understood how much investment is occurring pre-revenue, early revenue. But then when the switch flips, so that's the one kind of thing that isn't well appreciated. The other, though, is when the switch flips, how you go from, your spend, your revenue crosses your spend line, and then it flips around to profitability, and how that in aggregate, when you have multiple of such things going on simultaneously, how that then can flow through nicely to the bottom line. I think people generally understand the concept of that, but in our case, it looks like, geez, it's going slow, or what's going on. But that if you're doing one product at a time, and that's all that's featured, that's a little easier to do. When you're doing multiple products, then we're investing. We're investing in building awareness, driving trial, and trust in those products, and that takes some time.
Absolutely. My next question for you here, this is going to be one of these corporate-y questions, because I'm sure this is something that's been asked many, many times, especially probably from non-Canadian investors. And I think you already know where I'm going with this, is because I'm sure you've been approached by every one of the firms out there that do this, but you're just only on the TSX venture, RX on the venture, been that way for 10, 12 plus years, not longer. What's been the thought process to, one, stay on the TSX venture? Nothing wrong with it. People can find it. So there's nothing wrong with it. But what's been the thought process on, why staying just on the TSX venture, not even just going to the big board in Canada, going on the TSX, let alone getting like an OTC listing and then, potentially uplisting from there? Love to hear your thoughts.
So I'm very really measured, because I don't want to offend anybody in an answer to this one. Well, I'll say this, like, fundamentally, when we think about our strategy as a company moving forward, and by the way, this isn't what we think today, this is what we thought for a long time. We want our listing to support the strategy of our company. And if we are a capital consumer and we have to be in the market raising capital, then the where you're listed may matter more. So that's the argument for, well, geez, you should have a listing where you have greater exposure, where people might not have exclusions, where they can invest. So I would say that our listing, first and foremost, should support our strategy. We have a capital-light business model. We're cash generating. We've bought back, I think we spent $16 million in buying back shares, as opposed to raising new, fresh capital. We have no debt on the balance sheet. So our first capital that we would access will be debt capital. It won't be equity capital. So that's the kind of the short answer, believe it or not, to that. Then the rest of it is, we've qualified for a TSX listing a long time, like many years ago. Those things come with additional costs, which we don't think necessarily add value to the business and to our shareholders. Both internal costs and external costs, and there is a progression, obviously, and so yes, an uplisting to the TSX, in theory, gets you more eyeballs and gets you different investors. I was astounded, have been astounded over the years to have learned about which companies and which institutional investors owned BioSyent. I've been surprised, and people that are managing significant amounts of capital. And I was shocked. So apparently what I understood to be true wasn't true at all, actually. Big names that you would recognize on both sides of the border have been investors at various points in time. So I don't think it's been a hindrance per se. Yes, we are. You talked about us kind of well known against a certain segments of microcap investing, I suppose. But microcaps are getting ignored these days. I think in Canada they use the phrase small caps, U.S. microcap. We're getting ignored anyways. So it doesn't matter where we're listed. It's a little bit of a glib answer. I understand that, but I think at the end of the day, what investors are interested in is the business, the concept of the business, the opportunity in the business, management's approach. And what I have found, and because we do have institutional owners that have owned us a long time, is that if they understand what we're up to, where we're going, a feel for how we're going to get there, and confidence that we can keep building, they don't really care where we're listed. That said, I'll probably be on NASDAQ next week. I don't know. It's unlikely at this stage that we would ever go after a fully compliant U.S. listing. We have looked at a couple of times over the last number of years at the foreign issuer exemptions that exist for the U.S. market, and those things we may do something with that at some point.
For sure. And for full disclosure, Rene was kidding. He's not, BioSyent's not going to be on NASDAQ next week. Making sure that's clear for anybody listening. They're not going on NASDAQ next week. Quality joke, but not happening. So
thank you for clarifying.
Just make it. Hey, you never know. Somebody might be like, wait, was he kidding? But no, and you know what? I assume that was probably, your answer when it came to that question, because you're right. At the end of the day, and this is an interesting point in general when you're thinking about microcaps. Well, one, in the short term, just speaking the last 24 months, microcaps have both gotten killed and the sentiment has just been absolutely atrocious. So, at the same time, there's been a lot of investors that have seen that as opportunity to load up on names that they absolutely love. But the second point that I think is probably the most important is that, if you're running, the quality investors, they invest in businesses. They invest in good quality companies. And if they like it, at least nowadays, they'll figure it out. They'll figure out how to own it. So, I think those are two very good points. That's not to say that there aren't some of those benefits to being on the big board, especially as you mature, being an OTC, getting some, making it somewhat easier for maybe more the lay investor that, isn't as hardcore as some of the folks that we know. But, you're right. At the end of the day, you run a good business, you hit all the metrics that, most investors should be looking at for a business they want to own for the long term, they'll find you. And I totally agree with that sentiment 100%. So,
I would, we've got some European shareholders as well. I don't know how you buy, if you're in Frankfurt or how do you buy BioSyent? I have no idea how that works. I try not to speak in absolutes. I don't want to make it sound like, oh yeah, we don't need it. Forget it. That's our thing. I explained our thinking, not our absolute point of view is never do it. But we have for the most part been more focused on both our time management bandwidth on building the business as opposed to kind of where we're listed.
For sure. Listen, it's just one of those questions I've always been curious about with you guys. And now that I got you captive here for an hour, I figured I'd ask you. So
the other thing, we talked about microcap and small cap in Canada, just getting crushed over the last couple of years. Biotech has been in there too, right? So we're getting hit by that shrapnel as well. So that's what it feels like to me. My observation is, though we are not a biotech, we suffer from that. I think the investor interest has gone out for the most part, out of spec pharma, out of biotech, and out of microcap, small cap in Canada. So that's a fact. And so we're okay. We're just going to carry on. And when all of that, the tide comes back in again, we'll be here, we'll be bigger, we'll be better.
100%. All right. So, Rene, I've taken up a lot of your time today, and I know I'm sure we're going to do some updates, down the road and whatnot, but to close this out here, you already kind of talked about your vision for the company where all the different roads that could be available in the near or long term, that folks can go and listen back to earlier part of the interview. So I'll close this out with this, been a public company CEO for well over a decade now. It's not an easy job at all, so how would you rate your experience? Do you enjoy being a public company CEO? How's this experience been for you?
I've enjoyed it. It's been a one long learning curve that literally keeps going every day. So from that perspective, it's been a fantastic journey. That's not all about being a public company CEO, by my view. It's been about being a CEO and having to adapt from bootstrapping a business and having board meetings around a desk and to evolving the business to where we are now with a sight line for it to be significantly different even in 3 or 5 years. So that process has been immensely challenging, but I've really enjoyed it because I keep learning. There's always a new challenge. There's always a new issue. And yes, there are some days I wish that everything went smoothly. That would make, for that week, life better. I would say that I like the challenge. It's fun to build. I'm a builder and we're building.
Rene, we're there. With that, where can our audience go and find more information on BioSyent?
BioSyent.com, BioSyent.com. You may also go through the torture of getting information from our new CDAR Plus. It's not BioScience, the Canadian disclosure framework. I find it's been very frustrating for people. I'm sure you've encountered that. But yeah, and then each of our brands has an individual brand website as well if you want to find out. The other thing that I would just leave people with is that every quarter we do a presentation, kind of an update on the business presentation. It's voiceover PowerPoint slides. It's usually about 15 minutes. And that's both linked in every quarterly press release and also you can find it.
Very good. Well, Rene, thank you so much for joining me today. I really do appreciate it. Good luck. Stay safe. And I look forward to our next chat.
Great. Thanks, Bobby.
Thank you. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not provided as financial, legal, or any other advice. The information is not investment advice or an offer to buy or sell any securities or make any investment. The views expressed by guest speakers are their own, and any reference to third-party products, services, or information does not constitute an endorsement thereof by SNN or its affiliates. SNN expressly disclaims all liability for any individual's use of the information presented in this podcast.